Hi, my name is Rick Rosso. I'm director of the India program at the Center for Strategic International Studies. For those of you that are dialing in, you're probably familiar. Our work doesn't just focus on what's happening in New Delhi and with the union government. We focus a lot on what's happening at the state level. And a lot of our work, frankly, over the last 8 years is focused on energy and climate related issues. On that topic, and I know I might be a little bit biased because of where I sit, but I think most would agree, India is probably the single most important country in the world when we talk about our ability globally to meet carbon emission goals and the adoption of renewable energy. That's for three, primary reasons. First is India is just surpassing China to become the world's most populous nation. You now have a couple of decades of sustained growth at 6% average, and that's expected to proceed into the future. And based on programs like Make in India and the production incentive programs, it appears India is very much on the edge of a major wave of industrialization. We certainly hope so, especially as investors start to look at diversifying supply chains and such. Now, India set out its own massive target for renewable energy, looking at 175 gigawatts by the end of 2022. About 18 months ago, in our work with Indian state governments, it started to become apparent that India would likely fall a little bit short of that goal. And sometimes for outside experts and partners that are looking to engage and be supportive, India, a massive country, and it sometimes is very difficult to imagine how you can make a real big difference when you think about the enormity of some of the issues India grapples with in a country of its size. But as I pointed out in a piece I wrote about 18 months ago, this was back in October of 2021, there were actually a small number of states that really had to be the target for any kind of technical assistance of programming to try to help those states get back on track. They made up the bulk of what was apparently going to be a large gap in the renewable energy commitment. Now, to India's energy experts overall, we knew that a lot of the challenges that India states face are known. It's not like there's some kind of magic button that we would necessarily find, but we decided to conduct deep dive interviews with the 6 states that actually had the largest distance between the goals the central government is state by state, as well as 2 states that had actually exceeded the renewable energy targets, to find out what kind of learnings and what new areas of partnership that might be there and available. We hope that the utility of this project is not so much, again, recasting what we all know, things about India power grids and the ability to adopt renewable energy, but instead the utility of this report that we're launching today, Accelerate 175, looks at the things that state governments themselves had self-reported that they'd be interested and open to international cooperation and partnership. So hopefully through this report and through the recommendations that we have in the back end of the report, we can offer ideas to philanthropic organizations, to foreign governments and NGOs, not simply what the challenges are writ large, but those that the state governments will be responsive to. And each state has got some number, a half a dozen to a dozen topics where they're interested in engagement. None of these, again, is the magic wand, but engaging all of them simultaneously, hopefully we can be better partners as India looks to its enormous goal of 450 gigawatts by the end of 2030. Now, I've got 4 real experts that are here to help us both unlock the findings from the report, the two leads for the report, as well as 2 external experts to talk about what they saw in the report, but of course their own learnings and findings from their deep work in India over the many years. Starting off with the 2 leads for the report itself, my deputy director here at the program, Ms. Neelima Jain, who's a senior fellow with the CSIS India chair. Of course, Neelam has been leading our energy work and climate work for over 3 years. Prior to that, a range of senior roles, primarily with EESL, leading the Europe operations as well as leading the Ujala campaign. But also our non-resident expert, Dr. Mahesh Patankar, who's the founder and managing director of MPN Systems based in Mumbai. Been a counselor and action officer to the world, engaging the World Bank, Asian Development Bank, USAID, and others on some of the most significant projects and assisting us with these interviews that pulled together the bulk of this Accelerate 175 report. And 2 phenomenal respondents as well with deep expertise that I think will try to capture those things maybe that we missed, things that should be accentuated. First up is Abhishek Ranjan, who's a senior vice president of strategy and head of utilities and retail at Renew Power. Renew, of course, is India's largest renewable energy developer. And Abhishek has operational experience in multiple companies vital to energy transition, BSES, Reliance, and HPC. And also my friend, Dr. Nikit Abhyankar, who's a scientist at the Lawrence Berkeley Laboratory. expert in electricity markets and policy, not simply in India, of course, but deep experience in the United States and many other key markets around the world: China, Indonesia, Vietnam. And prior to that was at the awesome India-based think tank, Prius Energy Group. So great to have these two. But let me hand it forward first to Nilima and to Mahesh. Nilima, over to you.
Thanks, Rick, and excited to present about our report and the findings that we have. Well, as you mentioned, this report really aims to identify the barriers to RE deployment while also highlighting the opportunities, how India's partners could help the states potentially course correct towards the larger goal of deploying 450 gigawatt of RE. Now, 6 states form the bulk of the RE capacity gap: Maharashtra, Andhra Pradesh, Uttar Pradesh, Madhya Pradesh, West Bengal, and Tamil Nadu. Now, to examine why the deployment was not happening faster in a given state, we interviewed a group of stakeholders, a mix of public and private players entrenched in the state energy sector. So in addition to focusing on the 6 top underperforming states, we also captured the challenges of the 2 overachieving states, Rajasthan and Gujarat, because we believe the challenges these 2 states are grappling with today could become a reality for remaining Indian states as they play catch up. I must note the barriers identified in the reports are the perceptions of these interviewees, and we haven't separated the perception from the reality. These are boots on the ground, making policies and building projects, and we were very careful about preserving their voices. Coming to the findings of the report, I'll pick 3 of the key challenges and eventually the areas of opportunity that most of these interviews highlighted. And most of these challenges are rooted in the poor financial health of the distribution utilities, popularly known as discoms. The first being discoms are logged into these inflexible, expensive thermal PPAs, resulting in disproportionate fixed cost obligations for many discoms. On the other hand, the rapidly falling cost of RE is also exposing the old RE PPAs with higher tariffs, leading to states looking to renegotiate contracted PPAs. We have seen instances of renegotiations in multiple states. Now, to double down on this issue, the RE must-run mandate is also forcing several discoms to first buy RE power, regardless of what the RE tariffs are, which could potentially be expensive because they are coming from old RE plants. Now, the second challenge was that discoms are imposing restrictions on net metering. We know that most of the bulk of the shortfall is because of slow adoption of rooftops in the country. Now, the discoms are witnessing a steady rise in sales migration of high-paying commercial and industrial consumers because they are incentivized by the central government to privately procure RE. Now, if you look at just the difference, the solar tariffs are lower by 15 to 40%. In comparison with traditional grid tariffs for commercial and industrial consumers. So states have started to put restrictions on net metering, thus just slowing down the growth of rooftops. There are also delayed approvals and so on and so forth. On the other hand, the residential consumers who are subsidized have been very slow in adopting rooftops, largely because there is a lack of awareness on benefits, there is lack of awareness on installations, difficulty in choosing credible project developers. And the third barrier that was highlighted was a lack of robust demand, supply, and load forecasting, which is essential for optimizing the generation schedule and planning the resources just across the grid adequately. Now, apart from these commonly cited barriers, I do want to quickly note some very unique findings which came up during the survey, during our interviews. One, the challenges highlighted by the overachieving states like Rajasthan and Gujarat centered around the complex requirements of grid flexibility and resource adequacy. In fact, it was only Rajasthan that insisted on the needs or the benefits of an ancillary service market. The interviews from the states also highlighted the need for a more inclusive green transmission policy because of how solar farms are fueling land conflicts, especially in Rajasthan. Of course, the second half of the report dwells into, what could be the opportunities and what are the best practices that could be adopted from U.S. states. Despite the different contexts, some of the U.S. states have demonstrated many best practices that support policies and can act as models for some of the states, Indian states, seeking to accelerate the RE deployment. I'll stop here and hand over to my colleague Mahesh, highlighting anything that I may have missed out.
Thanks, Nilima, and thank you, Rick, for putting this interesting public launch together. I would like to just add and re-emphasize on a couple of points that Nilima talked to us about just now, specifically related to the discom financing. In the recent past, we have at least 10 odd states that have released the tariff orders that comes into force beginning 1st March 2023. And if you really look at the tariffs, it's really skewed towards a lot of subsidizing consumer base that is exposed to higher tariffs. That would mean having more and more cheaper renewables integrated as a reality. And that actually puts a lot of emphasis on the economic barrier, which Nilima was referring to, which is about loss of commercial and industrial consumers, which is a threat to the discom financing. The second part, which I wanted to highlight, was on the technical side, which is the limitation of the forecasting tools, as well as how do we really match the supply positions and the demand positions. India has been experiencing very high growth in the temperature profiles and the ambient temperatures in several states, right from the middle of March this year, and the distribution companies are really struggling to meet the demand and supply gaps. And that's where the forecasting of the renewable energy availability becomes extremely important from that perspective. And I would like to highlight another barrier that we captured, which was about the contracts that have already been signed by several states. And a very interesting challenge that was shared by a few states was as follows. They completed the bidding process, and another state ended up having their own bidding process, and which resulted into a market discovery which was lower than whatever their bid was. So as a part of their entire process of approvals and so on and so forth, the questions started coming up that another state actually got 25% lesser than what you managed to get. So should we rebid? And that actually has been one of the key barriers for them to conclude the contracts. And even if the contracts were concluded, because of the changes in the duty structures and so on, the contracts were not concluded from the supplier side. So that was another barrier which was mentioned by a few states. I will just add something on the rooftop photovoltaic systems, which is again a very important aspect. And as Nilima rightly mentioned, the gap is essentially in the rooftop photovoltaic targets. And there you have a very interesting challenge, which is that of access to finance. So if we put aside the commercial and industrial consumer base, it's very difficult for some of the retail consumers to access finance. There have been a lot of schemes that are available to finance large-scale, utility-scale renewable energy. But for smaller systems like 4 kilowatt, 5 kilowatt, if there is no appetite by the consumers to put out those systems on their own, access to finance from the commercial banks, public sector banks, private sector banks, and the non-banking financing corporations, NBFCs as we call those in India, has been a challenge. So I thought of just adding to the list which Nilima mentioned, and also re-emphasizing on the load forecasting part of it and the generation forecasting, challenge that was shared by a few discoms. Back to you, Rick. Thank you.
Mahesh. Well, of course, we'd love to talk about our own report all day long, but luckily we've got two terrific experts that have practical experience from the corporate sector and deep dive experience in understanding markets to help shape out maybe some of the challenges that states face, either things we covered or things that we didn't cover. Great to hand it over first to Abhishek Ranjan from Renew Power from the private sector vantage point. A lot going on. You guys are at the middle of it all, and love to see what you see that would help maybe accelerate this pathway for the huge 450 gigawatt target, because you're going to be such a vital player in getting there. So over to you, Abhishek. Thanks.
Thank you, Rick. Thanks for this report, a wonderful report. And I went through the report and found that many new insightful findings have been there. Many of the findings are common across the 6 states of the subject, and many of them are unique to the states as well. But there are certain other points as well which need to be tackled and which has a common thread across the Indian states. I'll start with the very first thing as to, yes, we have set a target of 500 gigawatt in our country, in India. But then whether the all RE will come up only in these 6 states or maybe 8 states with the CEA has considered in its recent transmission planning for the 500 gigawatt capacity. Now, this question has a deeper answer. So the point is, and it is related to your finding in the report, that is about the RE forecasting. When we see RE forecasting, the construct of the RE as so far in our country has been vanilla contracts based on only capacity utilization factor. And that stems from the fact that RE is supposed to be non-schedulable, non-firm, intermittent, variable, etc., not good for the grid. Now, having said that, so many years have passed, and now the construct, the entire design is now transitioning to a firm contract, firm schedulable RE power in megawatt terms or capacity terms, and that to 15-minute time block wise. Like in India, as you know, the settlement happens every 15-minute time block. So there is a need for the change in the business model, the way it is, tendered out, be it by Solar Energy Corporation of India or maybe the state discoms like GUVNL or even Rajasthan discoms. And the new thing which is coming up is load following round the clock RTC, round the clock RE enabled products. Okay. Now, if you do that, you also need to see, and you have already pointed out in the report, that the RE forecasting needs to be looked into. And what is that? Presently, the RE sources or RE locations, like for example, wind sites or solar sites, are evaluated in terms of individual location-specific capacity utilization factor. Okay. Why? Because the tariff is going to be determined based on the individual location. But in India, for example, now the general network access regulations are already in place, the copper plate kind of scenario, in terms of transmission, barring certain connectivity hiccups, where the last mile connectivity or substation is an issue because of land acquisition and so forth. Otherwise, the overall copper plate scenario, the GNA regulations within place. The idea is to see how we can add RE in not so conventional non-RE states. Okay, like for example, Odisha, or maybe Madhya Pradesh, or maybe certain others like UP, Uttar Pradesh, even Bihar or Jharkhand, and northeastern states. Okay, so which are non-traditional wind states or solar states. Individual CUF might be very, very low, but these can be clubbed together with the other RE rich, so-called RE rich state. And then you devise a solution which is round the clock, which is following the load pattern, which is coming up and down for the respective state or a group of pool of states. Okay, complementarity of the demand profiles across the states in India, as well as complementarity of the RE profiles across states, the wind profiles, even the east and west solar profiles, together with the improvement in the forecasting, which is going to forecasting error, is going to give a lot of boost to designing RE constructs, which is palatable to the taste of the discoms, and they do not feel persuaded just for the want of RPOs or maybe must-run status. So that will go. Okay, so that is one area, could be a potential, collaboration between the US and the Indian states. Second, we have spoken about net metering, and that is the bottoms-up approach of greening. Now, again, the discoms consider net metering as their competition because it is taking away the C&I consumer, and rightly pointed out in the findings of the report. But then idea is when you enable just transition, the models like community solar or the VNM, which has been attributed in the report, and even now we are talking about a hybrid RESCO model, wherein in Delhi, for example, the draft solar policy of Delhi has just come out. And we have been talking and we have been working on the same, that how you can utilize such solar assets owned by the discoms, either through a PPA mode or through a CAPEX mode. Okay, because it is a part of their own distribution network. It is having more benefits not only from the power, but also from the network aspect. Okay, so adding a virtual power plant. So how it can be utilized to solarize and provide energy access at a cheaper rate to the low consumption and low income category, which is a cross subsidized category, which is a subsidized category by the government. And it's going to have a multiplier effect not only for the government finances, but also for the retail tariff determination. So that is another area which will take away all the problems, like we have seen a 40 gigawatt of rooftop solar target. Against that, only 5 or 6 gigawatt were achieved out of 175 gigawatt, right? So another important factor is the market reform. So the market-based economic dispatch, which is long awaited, is going to take away the problem of self-scheduling by the discoms of the minimum technical limit of the thermal stations, right? So that goes away. So that is going to put a lot of gap to be filled in from RE, and a lot of good things happen when RE going to be more in the portfolio. Even with the current construct of the PPA, you don't need to get out of the PPA. You are paying the fixed cost, but then you are able to integrate more RE with a lower variable cost as per the merit order dispatch. So market-based economic dispatch, which is slightly delayed now, is going to be a single most very big reform while you continue to transition slowly from coal to green or fossil to non-fossil, while ensuring the sanctity of the current PPA structure. So which act as by the way, the long-term PPA are also somewhat a proxy of the capacity markets in India as of now. Now, one factor in the report, it says that the VNM is going to help address the problem of C&I consumers going away from the discoms. I fail to understand how. Either way, if the C&I consumers are going to consume not from the discom, from somebody else, the billed revenue of the discoms are going to go down, and that is what they don't want in the current construct, because they are the cross-subsidizing ones who are paying for the low consumption, low yield consumer, who are not paying up to the ACOS or the average cost of supply of the discoms. DER integration, so battery storage being integrated in Delhi, for example, we have already done. When I was there in BSES, we did some 6 distribution transformer level battery storage integration. But then more of capacity building and handholding is required, as correctly pointed out. In operation of the DERMS by the discoms, their transition from a discom to a DSO, distributed system operator, blockchain-enabled local energy market development, and something like FERC 2222, where the DERs have been allowed to, trade on a wholesale market, national wholesale market. So that collaboration would definitely help in understanding and better utilization of such DER assets by the distribution company. The grid modernization laboratory consortium point is very, very valid, and definitely grid flexibility, how to utilize, in fact, utilize battery storage as a component of the grid, and to utilize battery storage for grid expansion is very vital. So, sir, such experiences sharing and will be very, very important. By the way, the government of India has already come out with a very clear-cut definition of battery storage, its role in various nodes of the grid, and its definition in the Federal Electricity Act. It has been clarified. So that regulatory and statutory clarity is already there in place. Now, one of the important point is in the PPAs, like example have been cited, Saudi Rao, that renegotiation of PPAs happened when the older tariff RE was forced upon, where the new RE were having lower tariff. So they were some of the states were not ready to buy, but for the pressure of mustard, they were buying it. Now, let me come out here. There is a flaw in the PPA which needs to be fixed. I think that has also been mentioned in your report. That the third-party sale by the RE developer, apart from the first party, that is the discom, into the market is not allowed. So they have to take a ROFR in the current construct. That is, right of first refusal. Now, the curtailment under Section 11 is allowed only under the technical criteria or technical grounds. Otherwise, it is not allowed. So the states, what they see is if they allow this third-party sale, it would be seen that really there is no technical constraint in the grid, and therefore they are, they have intention to, get out of the PPAs, and that might adversely impact their positions they have taken in the respective court of law. Now, the idea here is if the tariff, for example, of that particular PPA is very, very high, say in Indian currency, maybe 5 rupees a unit, the older RE PPAs, and the current RE PPAs may be hovering around 3 rupees per unit. Now, still the 5 rupee PPA is, they are very much, tradable on the current power markets like day-ahead market and the real-time market, where the power market costs, especially this summer, for example, when the temperatures are soaring above 42 degrees Celsius now in Delhi, for example. Now, it is very much tradable. The around-the-clock tariff discovered on the markets are upwards of 4 rupees or 5 rupees. So easily tradable. But again, what I'm saying is it is not being allowed. Why? Because of the fact that I mentioned. But yes, the specific state in the question which has not been named, we are also one of the players over there. So we see that it is being already now allowed. They're allowing the curtailment is bare minimum, except for certain technical things. But that also can be allowed in the pockets wherever some pockets the states feel that there are cheaper sources and they can avail. And that point in time, it can be allowed to the the RE developers to tap day-ahead market or the real-time market. Okay. So that amendment in the PPA is a major thing which needs to be carried out. So with this, I think I'll close my comments, but overall a very good report which is there, and many other things are already being covered, and many other things need to be covered. I think more specifically the construct, both for the utility scale PPAs as well as the retail distributed assets, and forecasting part remains very, very important. As far as land is concerned, land is not a very big issue, whereas land might be an issue for a high yield sites. But when I'm saying that high yield sites may not be the only one, because the construct of the entire around the clock complementary RE profiles is changing. So you may require land in various pockets of the country, and that is also going to help distribute the RE development across the nation. Okay, so that way the land may not be a challenge at all. And coupled with the offshore wind, which India has already embarked upon in the state of Tamil Nadu, of course, and Gujarat. So over to you, Rick. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Abhishek. Well, I know in the corporate universe, you don't always have cheerleaders per se, but I think everybody that would be attending a call like this wants to see you and companies like yours continue to grow and succeed, because you're going to be the most vital link to try to meet these massive targets and try to save what the rest of us in the world screwed up over the last couple hundred years. Nikhil, over to you. I mean, the kind of work that you've been doing in India, studying grids, working with states, is just phenomenal. And the rest of us in this universe are just kind of following your pathway. So I'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences, something you saw in the report that was there or not there, or something that you're working on that you think, has to get a lot more attention. Can't thank you enough early morning for joining too. Over to you.
Thanks a lot, Rick. And I do have some slides to share, and looks like they are being shared. So first of all, let me congratulate you, Rick, Nilima, and Mahesh on taking this report out. This report could not have come in at the right time and could not have been more accurate in terms of what it addresses. So state distribution utilities is where the rubber hits the road, and whatever federal central policies we may talk about, ultimately it's the discom and the utilities that are going to sign the contracts and that are ultimately going to install those capacities. So for any clean energy deployment, the role of state discoms is absolutely critical, and you hit the nail on its head. So congratulations and thank you for the report. The report touches upon several topics. I wouldn't go into each of those and my reflections on those, but I've identified 5 themes that the report kind of generally brushes upon. And those 5 themes could be quite critical, especially going forward from now until 2030 to achieve India's target of 500 gigawatts of clean power by 2030. So the first is the need for firm capacity is real. Renewables are getting increasingly more efficient, especially with hybrid power plants with solar and wind, solar and storage, wind and storage, so on and so forth. So there is increasing contribution of renewables on the peak, but all said and done, the peak coincidence of renewables is still significantly limited. And to maintain the grid reliability and dependability, the grid would need some level of firm capacity, particularly in the next 10 years or so, until the storage technology fully matures, particularly long duration storage and so on and so forth. So this chart shows a simulated coal generation profile for all India in 2030, assuming the 500 gigawatts of clean power gets installed and assuming all the necessary market reforms such as market-based economic dispatch, some level of long-term capacity markets are already in place. What would coal dispatch, thermal dispatch look like in 2030 when everything goes in the direction it should be going? So there are 2 major findings. Finding number 1 is even with this aggressive clean energy deployment, we still find nearly 230 gigawatts of coal capacity will be needed by 2030, mainly to maintain the grid reliability and dependability. Only about 180 odd gigawatts of this coal capacity will operate as base load, about around 70% capacity factor, give or take. But nearly 50 gigawatts of the coal capacity will likely run at a low capacity factor of 30 to 40%. Now, this is where the role of distribution utilities and particularly state regulators becomes critical, is how are those contracts going to be managed? Because we've already seen significant stranding of assets, of old thermal assets that are operating at low capacity factors. So this will be an interesting area to look at. Long-term coal contracts and how the low capacity factor assets are managed and how those contracts are structured. That's number 1. Number 2 is the real issue about increasing the clean generation is with coal generation and not capacity. And so that's why it's really important to kind of separate those 2 issues out, generation versus capacity. As we saw on the last chart, by 2030, India would still need close to 230 gigawatts of coal capacity. India already has close to 210 gigawatts of coal capacity, give or take. And this chart shows the variable cost, just the variable cost of the 200 gigawatts of the existing coal capacity in the country. So what is interesting is nearly 100 gigawatts of the existing coal capacity, nearly 50% of the total installed coal capacity today, has a variable cost of more than 2.5 to 3 rupees per kilowatt hour. That's the standard renewable energy contract. So therefore, there is a very natural way, so to speak, and obviously I'm making it sound much easier than it actually is on the ground, but there is a way to swap this expensive coal generation with cheaper renewable energy while also maintaining the coal capacity that might be needed for grid reliability and dependability and maintaining the resource adequacy requirements for the utilities. Now, this has 2 advantages. Number 1 is, of course, this ensures the grid reliability concerns and so on. And obviously, there are some operational challenges. Should these coal plants be operating at technical minimum levels? What about the loss of efficiency? If they're truly operating at technical minimum levels, then how much of a generation swap you could actually get? I mean, I'll be happy to talk about those, but those are solvable issues. And the second interesting point is this also addresses some of the transition concerns to a certain extent, that you are not required to retire the coal capacity, just retire the coal generation. That way, all the coal jobs, particularly in the power plants, can stay alive as long as the coal capacity is maintained, and the grid also needs that level of firm support. And the third theme, which is also touched upon in the report, but not to great detail, is the role of energy storage. So I think Nilima, Mahesh, as well as Abhishek mentioned this in their talks, but I'm really talking about grid scale energy storage. So energy storage, particularly from a 2030 time frame, will be a critical resource for maintaining the grid dependability. And there are multiple studies that have shown how much energy storage we would need, what kind of energy storage, should it be battery, should it be pumped hydro. I don't want to go into the details, but just the role of energy storage is going to be really important. And in general, there seems to be consensus around 200 gigawatt hours to 300 gigawatt hours of energy storage by 2030, and that can come through different technology sources. Now, this leads us to designing some energy storage specific regulatory framework, because unfortunately, currently, although MOP has defined what constitutes an energy storage very well, but at the state level, the regulatory framework on regulating energy storage contracts, how energy storage gets treated in the wholesale market, should energy storage get the capacity value and the capacity payment, can energy storage play in the ancillary market, and so on and so forth. Those regulatory frameworks are not entirely clear. And that's also one of the reasons why utilities may not be investing in energy storage as much as they should. The second problem is the cost of energy storage. And this is a little perplexing, because all over the world, particularly the battery storage costs have fallen dramatically. And in some of the recent bids that we have seen, that SECI called or NTPC called, there have been some encouraging improvements in how energy storage costs are looking in India, but there is still a long way to go. For example, in the US, a typical 4 to 6 hour lithium ion battery storage cost, grid scale, should be approximately of the order of 4 to 6 cents per kilowatt hour stored. So that is equivalent to approximately 4 rupees, give or take 4 to 5 rupees per kilowatt hour. Those are the contracts that have already been signed just in the last 1 or 2 years. And now with lithium prices dropping pretty dramatically in the global market, I don't know if you have seen, but the lithium prices have dropped by nearly 50 to 70% just in the last 2 months as supply chains have started to ease out. So there is an increasing opportunity to latch on to those lower storage prices. It doesn't have to be lithium ion batteries. It could be pumped hydro, but this is a resource that cannot be ignored and has to be captured on. The fourth aspect that I would like to highlight on, again, this is the report touches upon some of these aspects, but I think there is a lot more that the state utilities could do, particularly going forward, is about the demand side resources. So the chart shows actual load curves, actual hourly load curves in 6 months across the year, in Karnataka on the left and Delhi on the right. And we have the actual load curves for the last 10 years, from 2010 through 2020. And again, I wouldn't go into the details of exactly what curve for which year, but in general, the lowest curve, the red curve, is 2010. The top curve, the purple curve, is 2020. And you can just see across 2 states, the load shape has changed dramatically. There are multiple reasons for it. For example, in case of Karnataka, they shifted a lot of nearly 3,000 to 4,000 megawatts of their agricultural load to solar hours to better integrate the solar energy that they built. In case of Delhi, it was really the prevalence of space cooling load, particularly room air conditioners. And what is interesting is Karnataka used to be an evening peaking system. Now Karnataka has become an afternoon peaking system because of the agricultural load shift. Delhi, on the other hand, used to be an afternoon peaking system because of the commercial space cooling load. But because residential air conditioners have now increased in penetration pretty dramatically, Delhi's peak load now officially occurs at 1 a.m. at night when there is no commercial load. It is all residential air conditioning summer load around July or August. So this demand side resources, how you could use demand response, load shifting. Can industrial load be shifted? I mean, Abhishek talked about how renewables could follow load. That's an excellent resource, but there could also be load that follows the supply, that follows renewables. And because of transport electrification, industrial electrification, green hydrogen, there is also an increasing opportunity for using these demand side resources to our benefit. And who else than the Indian utilities that have used the demand response, also known as load shedding, over all these years as one of the critical tools to manage the grid demand. Again, jokes apart, but I think this is one area where there needs to be a lot of regulatory work as well as a lot of techno-economic work that needs to happen. And finally, the regulatory framework, particularly I believe one of the most important lacking regulatory frameworks, particularly in the state context, what we find is some level of capacity markets, long-term capacity markets. And to enable the long-term capacity market, we need a pretty robust and solid resource adequacy framework. And I think everybody is aware what resource adequacy framework is, but just for everybody's benefit, resource adequacy is when the regulators or some system planner essentially asks the utilities to estimate what is utilities' firm capacity requirement given the demand changes, given the renewables coming in, given utilities' existing resource availability. What is the firm capacity requirement that utility has, and how much of firm capacity utility needs to procure? Now, because of the load diversity in India, Maharashtra's load is quite different from West Bengal's load, is quite different from Tamil Nadu's load, and it's quite different from Delhi's load. So there is a greater opportunity for utilities to share this firm capacity, to share the resource adequacy requirement with each other. So there is resource adequacy framework needs to be in place at the state level, but also at the national level, where multiple utilities could trade these resource adequacy credits in a formal capacity markets or even in a bilateral capacity market. So let me just stop here and once again congratulate the authors for an excellent and a very timely report. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Nikit. And you certainly added a lot too that needed to be augmented. Your great experience, we knew that would certainly be the case. I've got a few questions that I wanted to tee up for the discussants, the authors, as well as the respondents from the project. And a lot of this is, thinking about that next step. All right, it's nice to release a report. It's nice to further sort of catalog the ways that we can engage. But around this table, we got a lot of folks that have actually done that in the past. And as we start to brief this to, foreign governments, to NGOs, to foundations and others that might be able to, to be those partners, we all need to figure out the best ways to take that next kind of step. Let me first start, I think, with kind of a bit of an operational issue for Abhishek, if you don't mind. Looking at things that the government has, the steps that they've actually taken to improve the market viability for private companies. You've seen, and I've been working the energy sector for about 25 years in India, going back to the Electricity Act, the Accelerated Power Reform Development Program, UDAY, things like that. Watching the government's own, indicators like the Prapti website, it looks like, last year's announcement, they'd start shutting off states from the central pool if they're not paying arrears. Seems to have done pretty good on at least, catching up kind of the backlog there. I wonder, looking back over the last number of years, there's been all manner of things that the government's kind of thrown at the sector to try to incentivize and grow. That one seems to kind of stand out. Do you think that one's viable over the long term? Are they going to be able to sustain, have that kind of political courage to, cut states off or threaten to? Are there other things that they've done recently that you've seen has been kind of shot in the arm for those in the private sector?
Yeah, thanks, Rick. So what I believe is this is a mix of carrot and stick policy. All these years, carrots were being dangled. But the point was because of the vicious cycle, so the payment capability of the discoms to the GenCos, the mounting dues, and LPSCs, that is late payment surcharge, mounting on the principal payments. That is what is called maybe in some parlance, regulatory assets also, which were recognized by the specific state regulatory commissions, but were never passed on in the retail tariff, right? So now when they started shutting off the central quota, and many of the states, they depend heavily on the central quota. So on the pool like NTPC, NHPC, these are the central stations and central PSUs. So and that was a very important factor which forced them to pay up. So divert some funds from their budgetary allocations and make it a priority instead of throwing it on some other things. The second thing which they did was also saying that if you are not paying or maintaining LC, that is letter of credit or escrow account, that is payment security mechanism, on a day-ahead basis, the Grid India or the POSOCO or SWAI POSOCO would ensure that they are maintaining this. If they are not, they will shut off the discom's capability of trading on the power exchanges. Okay, you can't sell or purchase on the day-ahead markets. So that was a major problem. So even if a single PPA or central station, you're not paying in full, and they had given some leeway also. So that would have been allowed as an exception. But if you are not doing that, you are not maintaining your current payables, you will not be allowed to schedule other stations, A, from the same GENCO or otherwise central stations, and neither would you be allowed to purchase or sell on the power market. This means virtually the load shedding in the country or that state, or maybe, and that is a politically very bold step which has been taken. Now, there are reasons to it. I don't want to get into it, but then there are reasons to it, bold steps taken, and we had a very positive thing. Now, the thing is, it is clear that with the growing collections as displayed on the Prapti portal, these methods are definitely going to work. And it should be bundled with the carrot as well. For example, RDSS is giving a lot of money to the states to improving their capabilities, like, for example, demand forecasting and resource adequacy planning, metering infrastructure, smart metering, and prepaid smart metering infrastructure. You see a lot of AMI-related tenders or RFPs which are coming in across the states. States like Bihar, etc., have been claiming that they have made a lot of savings in terms of their collection, billing, improving the billing efficiency. And that money is the money which they are using for making payment to the GENCOs, and hence the increase in the Prapti portal collections. So yes, so this is going to set the clock right. Yes, I agree with that statement. And definitely they need to be treated with both, I mean, a soft hand and a hard hand. And this has worked. Over to you, Ray.
Understood. Nikit, so, as we think about kind of process orientation here, you've got such a long experience on engaging. One thing that we've kind of found, is you've got such kind of quick transition of a lot of officials that are interlocutors at the state level. With that long book of work that Lawrence Berkeley's been building up, this great set of engagements over time, do you find that starts to get a little bit easier, that when you show up with the state government, you talk about cooperation, the doors open a little bit faster? Or does that transition impact you like a lot of others, where it's, you got to constantly keep your foot on the gas pedal on meeting folks and engaging? Does it get easier over time, or is it always going to be, sort of that churn and having to judge and juggle it?
No, I mean, this transition is definitely challenging, irrespective of how many years and how much time you've spent in the sector. So it is also challenging for us. But there are kind of 4 factors that I would imagine that generally helps and that have helped us. Number 1 is just the long-term engagement help. The name carries for yourself, and then that helps. Second is the engagement needs to happen at 2 levels. So typically, most of the top leadership at the state level comes from the administrative service. That is the leadership that kind of transitions every 1 or 2 or 3 years. But there is also a technical cadre that rises up to significantly high levels of leadership. So engagement with the technical cadre at the state level also becomes equally important as much as the administrative service leadership at the top. And third is building some level of institutional memory also helps. For example, that can take the form of MOUs, that can take the form of some exchange visits and so on. So that institutional memory does stay because as I mentioned, this technical cadre doesn't retire from the utilities for 30 years, 35 years. And finally, some level of engagement both at the central as well as the state level also helps. For example, when the states also see that you are engaging with other agencies in the sector, other agencies are taking you seriously, they also start taking you seriously. And those four things have worked for us, and I believe should work for any organization looking to build those collaborations.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Mahesh, I'm going to get off, I think, some of the questions we were talking about before. I wanted to ask you, green hydrogen came up at the end when Nikit was presenting there just briefly. But, this at the time you're doing these interviews, the national government's working on the green hydrogen policy. They launch it just around the time the interviews were sort of wrapping up. 125 gigs of renewables dedicated to that, at least is kind of the objective by 2030. As you talk about, helping India with the renewable target and such, and the state governments you engaged in, did that come up a lot? Like, is there a concern about diversion of a lot of the renewables that's going in being used for this? Because with these amount of money being thrown on the table, we find a lot of states are sort of interested in how they can get a piece of it. So, did that come up a lot as potentially diverting the use of the renewables that are coming up, or is it something that's still a little further off the table and aspirational?
So I wouldn't call it, it's still aspirational. It's in fact coming towards sort of some kind of a reality. We did not hear any kind of concerns raised by the state officials so that 125 gigs is going to be used for industrial decarbonization and so on. In fact, interestingly, quite a few bureaucrats did mention that it's going to only increase the employability, it's going to improve the industrial productivity, and all of that is sort of a lot of tax collection and so on. So there was, I would say, a lot of resonance to that. I'm sure it's just early days as far as the hydrogen mission is concerned. So I think we need to keep watching it during the coming 5 years.
Yeah. Well, one last question, I think, before we let everybody go on the panel here, but it's for Neelima. You've been leading the charge for our team in so many different areas on electromobility, decarbonization, et cetera. What sort of ideas do you find when you have these workshops with Indian states that kind of stick? Because ultimately, again, from this report, we're trying to initiate positive change with the big target there. Is it examples from around the world, examples from other states, bringing peers together? What sort of things have you found that seems to resonate the most in the many, many interactions that you've hosted and organized with Indian state officials? What seems to stick?
I have to say, Rick, one common thread across all these interactions is the opportunity or the scope for just cross-pollinating ideas, right? Cross-fertilization and cross-pollination, not just within the country, but also with the global peers. And we see that, especially in the context of this report, several states, especially Maharashtra, Uttar Pradesh, were very open to learning from the states like Rajasthan and Gujarat, best practices on how they were able to deploy rooftops, or how were they able to, create these innovative land procurement policies that resulted in cheaper renewable energy tariffs. So we see that often. It's not just limited to within the country, but I think the most effective first step for realizing these opportunities would have to be utilizing the full potential of the peer exchanges, because you learn so much more effectively from the practical experiences of global peers, officials, experts, labs, and just gaining valuable insights into approaches that are working to, accelerate some of these missions, like RE deployment, and of course, pitfalls to avoid. So these exchanges could definitely result in meaningful subnational collaborations and could endure beyond just a bilateral dialogue.
Yeah. Well, that's great. Well, the report itself is going to be launched on the CSIS website momentarily, if it's not up already. So you can catch, and the latter portion of the report has individual states that we covered from this. And it's a mix, as Neelima kind of mentioned, some states that did extremely well in adoption of renewables, like Maharashtra and Tamil Nadu, but they just had extremely high targets. And other states like West Bengal that just had a tough time kind of getting that initial momentum. And then states like Rajasthan and Gujarat that actually exceeded their targets. And all of a sudden, different kinds of challenges sort of pop up there. So, our job next is to take these learnings and the great feedback I think that we have from our two terrific experts, Abhishek and Nikit, to talk to the NGO community, talk to the donor community, and try to accelerate, some of those partnerships that can help India as they aim for this massive target of 450 gigawatts by 2030. We all want to see India get there, and we all have a role to play as friends and partners. So thanks to our authors for this report, Neelima and Mahesh. Thanks to our expert respondents for keeping us on track. The private sector view is critical for this, and Nikit, the work that you've done from Berkeley Labs is phenomenal. And I hope everybody has an opportunity to pick up the report and tell us what else we might have got right and got wrong. We're always hungry to learn and be the best partners we can. So thanks, everybody, and we'll be back with more details on this as we begin to evolve the program.